When people ask me what I love about being in the industry I'm in, it's just how fast you can learn and grow and develop. The way I've seen folks develop over 5 or 10 years is incredible. But none of that growth happens if you don't intentionally slow down to reflect on what you're experiencing and kind of pull out those learnings.
Welcome to the True Leadership Podcast, where we sit down with executive leaders to explore what leadership really means through the lens of their stories, their wins, their struggles, their vision, and their lessons along the way. I'm Ty Hammond, founder of One Mountain Leadership and creator of the True Leadership Approach, an awareness-based path that helps leaders shift their focus from what to do about their problems to how to grow from them. Whether you're just stepping into leadership or are well-seasoned and at the top of your game, your potential won't be realized following someone else's script, but you can draw insights from their stories and turn it into wisdom by putting it into practice in your own life. Welcome to the True Leadership Podcast, where we explore the essence of leadership beyond tactics and performance by sitting down with executives to hear what matters most to them. I'm your host, Ty Hammond. Today's guest is Justin Bullock. Justin is a seasoned sales leader known for scaling high-performance teams and driving rapid growth across SaaS and tech. As VP of Sales at Recall.ai, he helps power the next generation of AI applications by giving developers a single API to capture and analyze meeting data from every major platform. Previously at Envoy, Justin led 6x revenue growth, built a 70-person go-to-market org, and expanded operations globally. With over 18 years at companies like New Relic, Periscope Data, and SAP SuccessFactors, he's known for pairing disciplined execution with authentic mentorship to create sales cultures that win and last. It's my pleasure to welcome Justin to the show today. Welcome, Justin.
Thanks, Ty. It's a pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. I always begin here with this question. Of course, every leader has a beginning. Who we are as leaders at work and in life starts taking shape long before we advance to any executive position of leadership. Who is someone from your early life or an early experience that shaped the leader and the person that you are today?
Yeah, thanks, Ty. The first person that comes to mind is my uncle. His name is Kevin Grubbs, and he played an important role in my development as a young child. What I remember most is him being my basketball coach from 3rd to 8th grade. And I'm going to cheat a little. I have two. The other one is my actual high school basketball coach. So it's interesting. They both were coaches, and they later inspired me to coach basketball too, which maybe we'll get into. But the reason I bring up both of them is the gift of high expectations. They both had high expectations, and I'm talking even all the way back to 3rd grade basketball. The expectations were that we were taking it seriously, that we were there to get better. And I took that with me later in life into leadership roles because high expectations are a gift, and it's really about believing in people's potential. That's why high expectations exist, and it's what drives them. So they both come to mind. They were very formative for me in my early days.
You know, I hear that, and it sounds like to me a worthwhile distinction. I feel like what you said there is believing in someone's potential is way different than being disappointed if someone doesn't meet an expectation. So I'm really capturing that piece, and I'm curious if you could say a little bit more, like, how did that high expectation of you come through these relationships in a way that you felt like was so generative and beneficial?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I think it's easy to talk about this in the context of sports because what they both taught me was that sports was only part of the equation, right? So in the case of my high school basketball coach, his name's Tom Bonfili, kind of a famous in California high school basketball circles. He's been doing this for a long time. And what it meant was that it extended off the court. It extended to being off the court as well. When you were on Tom Bonfili's team, school was a huge priority, right? And so, yes, what we did at practice and in the games mattered tremendously, but he was there to coach the whole person. And I think with my uncle and with my high school coach, it was very clear that there were things that were just bigger than basketball, right? Or bigger than the team. things like integrity, things like winning with class, and taking care of yourself as a whole person. And so those are the lessons I learned from them and carried with me. And it's the same, I think, in leadership and business, right? What we do in between the lines or on the court at work is important, but being a leader is more than that, right? And so I think that was the earliest foundation of realizing that how we do something is how we do everything, right? And so how we practice is how we play in the game, but how we practice and play is also taken into the rest of our lives. So I learned that lesson very early on. Very grateful for them for that.
This sounds like a really valuable lesson, and I'll be curious to hear in the rest of this conversation how that wisdom imparted by those mentors and influences carries through in your own leadership. Of course, in this podcast, we're exploring the essence of leadership, true leadership. And of course, that means different things to different people. So what does true leadership mean to you, and what makes a true leader in your eyes?
Yeah, I think ultimately it comes down to how you impact others. And so, we can get back to that a bit, but it's certain qualities, but ultimately it is about how you impact others. So for me, I think the most important qualities for a leader are humility, first and foremost. People respond to a leader being vulnerable, a leader admitting mistakes, um, a leader holding themselves accountable, especially publicly. So I think for me, it's about humility. It's certainly about hard work. Don't know many areas of life where you can achieve success without hard work. And it's also intentional growth. I think there are some times where leaders get to a certain point and then they feel like they've made it or they've plateaued. And I couldn't disagree more, right? I have a healthy dose of imposter syndrome that really motivates me. And you use those skills and those qualities to then impact others. That's the greatest reward for me personally.
You mentioned right at the beginning of your response here, impact. I'm curious if you could expound a little bit on, someone is really embodying these values of true leadership to you that you are working to embody in your own leadership. What is the impact that one sees on other people through that?
Yeah. Yeah. I think we probably all felt times in life where we just feel the power of when someone believes in you. Um, you'll often hear people say, "This person believed in me before I believed in myself," right? Um, it shows up a lot in business when you're hiring for junior roles, maybe roles where people are a few years out of college. I see this a lot in software entry level sales positions. And sometimes these conversations happen 3, 4, 5 years down the road where someone just says, you have no idea how nervous I was to start at XYZ company. Um, it was my first job in tech. And, from that very first interview, I felt a connection. This is a personal story, right? With you, Justin, and the fact that you believed in me just gave me the confidence to keep pushing myself. And so I think it shows up that way. I think it shows up in terms of advocacy. And so as we're all trying to, whether it's climb the corporate ladder or grow in different ways, you do need advocates along the way. And so it seems very impactful for folks. And people very rarely forget those times where you advocated for them, right? Um, it can be in very official ways, like putting someone up for promotion, pleading your case to the decision makers in that scenario, or it can just simply be highlighting things that people do well. That's a skill that actually comes quite naturally to me. It's one of the reasons I love coaching youth basketball. Is I love teaching in a way where it's, hey, this thing you just did was really great. Let's do a lot more of that, and balancing that with, of course, criticism, critique, constructive criticism, of course. So I think those are a couple of ways where it shows up, and it's really interesting what people remember, what they latch onto, and what they sometimes bring back into conversation years later.
It really makes me think of the very first class that I had, and I got a master's degree in social work, and the teacher sat silent in the corner, and she got up and wrote out on the blackboard in big huge letters, "You will never know the impact that you have on the lives of those you touch." And she turned around and she said, "And you will have an impact on every single life that you touch. And I was really taken aback by that. And I just wanted to sort of throw it into the mix there, that it's glorious and it's wonderful when people tell us what impact there is. And there's so many other times that they won't tell us. And then there may be even the glorious times that they don't even know that it's us that has had the impact. And maybe that's the best one of all. And so just I appreciate it so much, the conversation around impact, because I do believe that we have an impact regardless of whether we want to or not. And to be attuned to that is particularly important. So life and leadership, of course, is shaped by fundamental turning points that we encounter along the way. I'm really curious to learn from you. If there's a specific turning point that you can remember back to, sometimes it's a specific moment of, illumination. Other times it happens, more over time. But can you share about a time when you realized that your way of leading or living really no longer was meeting the demands of work and life, and growth was really needed?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think back to a time, it was actually 2018. I just started as a director of sales at Envoy. And the VP of sales and success who hired me, his name was Russ, someone from my network. I've been wanting to work with Russ for a long time. Got this opportunity. A few months after I started, I was hired to basically manage what was a very small sales team at the time and scale it pretty rapidly from like 5 to 14 reps the first 12 months. And I butted heads a little bit with one of the existing account executives. And this was odd for me because I think one of my skills is really getting along with everyone. And so I found it challenging because there was one individual on the team where we didn't mesh very well. And some of the coaching I was offering wasn't being well received. Ultimately, that employee left the company. And at many early stage companies, it's often rare to see voluntary departures. It certainly happens, but when you're growing and succeeding, it can be a bit jarring when someone elects to kind of get off the ship, get off the rocket ship, so to speak. And so because I was relatively new and this relatively high performing sales rep decided to exit, just like I would today if I were in his position, the VP at the time said, well, I'm going to do a little bit of a 360 review, make sure there isn't something kind of strange going on, or maybe something that I had caused, right? And he was very upfront about that, so I really appreciate that, very transparent. And some of the feedback from the team was pretty formative for me, and hearing it through my manager at the time was certainly impactful. The two things that really stood out is he tried to drive home the concept that we hear a lot when you step into leadership, which is, hey, you need to remember that you're not your rep's friend. Now that sounds interesting, right? It almost has a negative tone to it. But what it's trying to do is just clearly separate into the difference between being a friend and being someone's leader or manager, especially in business. And we walked through that in more depth, but it's something I knew, right? It's like this wasn't a new concept, but given the context of everything that had gone on, it was a particularly helpful conversation, and it was clear I needed to grow in that area. The other one was a little bit more specific, which is, I like to leverage my network. I like to leverage people. I want to get multiple opinions and perspectives. So when things weren't going well with this individual, I went to a few members of the team, like other managers in adjacent groups, a couple of folks that I knew had worked with that individual in the past at another company and had the best intentions, right? I'd like to learn a little bit about maybe ways to work with this individual. And given that you have history, perhaps you could offer some advice. What I learned there is, and this is a really important sales leadership or just leadership lesson in general, which is too often, I think leaders early in their leadership journey will try to decide if what they're doing is right or wrong. That's the lens they're looking through. Instead of looking through the lens of, is this effective? Is this effective for the person I'm speaking with, the group I'm leading, whatever it may be? And so I had the best intentions. I was trying to glean information from folks that had worked with this individual. But to my team, to those folks that I was engaging with, it felt like I was going behind that other person's back. or they felt a little bit uncomfortable because they felt now that they had to participate in this, I guess, tense situation. And so that was really eye-opening because it taught me that although I had the absolute best intentions, I have no doubt of that, um, it wasn't particularly effective. And learning the difference between those lenses to look through was really important.
It sounds like an extremely valuable lesson. I love that distinction between good and bad, right and wrong, and what works well and doesn't and doesn't work well. I think it's a much more effective lens to look through. What what do you feel like you needed to let go of or outgrow in order to move, actually get what you needed from that lesson there?
Yeah, I laugh because it was pretty specific and it's become more and more obvious as the years have gone by. I needed to outgrow my own personal personality trait that just has a strong desire to be liked. It's pretty much that simple. Um, being engaging, being warm, being someone that can build genuine relationships is important, but there's a line there where um, in order to be the most effective leader, you have to let that go a little bit. You're going to make decisions that are not always popular in the moment. You're going to make decisions that people disagree with, but ultimately you can get in trouble if you're too focused on uh, being liked and being respected. And it, again, comes from a great place. I want in a couple of times where I learned that difficult lesson, my goal was to add value. Right, my goal was to positively impact people. But there's a difference between that and like a desperate need to be liked, and that
Boy,
was something I had to work
sometimes it's those blind spots and things that we can't see yet that those good intentions can really drive the opposite impact
on.
of what we want. But boy, everything you're talking about, really shows a commitment to growth. And I firmly believe that, the path of leadership of life, of course, requires a real commitment to that. Thinking about your own journey over the past years in your career, what's been the most valuable investment that you've made in yourself for your own learning and growth?
Yeah, I think there's an overarching theme and then some specific tactics that show up. The overarching theme is being more open and embracing feedback. And I think this actually ties to the flaw that we just discussed, which is if you really do have a strong need to be liked and respected, feedback can be painful at times, right? It can feel even like a personal attack, which sounds really dramatic. Um, so it took me longer than I'd like to admit to really embrace feedback. And so that's an overarching theme that I definitely had to learn. Um, and then specific tactics are like leveraging external coaches, for example. I think, Ty, you're building a business around this. I have a wonderful coach. His name is Kevin Romani that I meet with once a week. We've been meeting for about a year and a half. And it's one of those things where you get out of it what you put in, but it's been invaluable to me in my journey here at the current company, but also in my personal growth. And I think one last thing I would touch on is, I'm in a fast-growing industry, a fast-moving industry. It's it's a young industry in terms of like there's a lot of young professionals, young in their career, young in life that drive the technology industry. And but I've been doing this for almost 20 years. And one thing I recognized a few years back was I wanted to just have more energy, more focus in my role. I've constantly pushed myself to have roles that make me just the right amount of uncomfortable with lots of bigger and bigger challenges. So one decision I made specifically back in 2024 is I gave up alcohol for 443 days, if you're counting. And it was a very transformational experience. I could do a whole podcast on that, but I learned a lot. I saw a tremendous amount of benefits and really changed my relationship with like, drinking. Um, that was an important time, and I certainly learned a lot.
It's a little too potent for me to just go on to the next question. Would you be willing to
Sure.
expound a little bit more in particular? Because I think that these kinds of, the insights that can arise when we shift behavior like that, and ultimately make different choices and what that can help us see is so profound. What are maybe some nuggets of what value there was in that, choosing to stop alcohol for a time?
Yeah, I think number one is just the like physical benefits. So waking up with a lot more energy, sleeping a lot better, like your skin looks bright and fresh, that kind of thing. Um, for me, I'm also very like I have a very active mind, so I think alcohol can numb that a bit. Um, as I started experiencing the first few weeks and months, I just found myself with like a tremendous amount of energy, and you can focus that energy into more productive things like exercise, for example, and family time. But something else I want to point out around that is I found a really powerful why to get started on that journey. And that actually was something kind of external to me that really motivated me. This wasn't particularly dramatic, but some things were happening in my family where my wife and my oldest child were both going through some personal things and expressing a lot of feelings around like this is just something I can't change, right? Or just feeling that way. And I felt extremely inspired to be an example of we are stronger than we think we are. And that became an insanely powerful driver for me. Um, I'm really grateful for that because it kind of took me seeing struggles in others to realize I had this opportunity to do something great for myself and ultimately something that really benefited, I think, my teams at work and my family. It was really amazing.
Oh, that sounds so powerful. I think of the quip show don't tell, and what it
Mm,
is,
don't know
what it
it.
what it is to truly model
Don't
and
know the quip.
and to make the choices ourselves and to show and embody that and so that other people in our orbit actually just see it and feel it, that it is possible, whether it's the same pattern that they're looking at or not. So powerful. Leadership, of course, is also about what we're shaping for tomorrow. You've already, spoke to a successful 20-year career, a growing, budding family. I'm curious to hear what's your vision for your leadership, your legacy, or the impact that you want to have in the years ahead?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question. I'm going to tell a very short story here. So I found my own love for coaching basketball, which clearly comes from those great experiences I had, leaders I looked up to. But I developed a habit. I coached like 7 seasons of my kids playing basketball and developed this habit early on where the very first practice, and don't worry, this relates to the business as well. The very first practice after the team introduces themselves and maybe we run around a little bit, I sit the team down and I say, hey, team, we have one rule on this team. And the rule is it's more of a mantra. Our enemies are outside of these walls. And like, depending on how young the kids are, it doesn't always make a lot of sense to them. So I usually explain it. I say things like, well, if our enemies are not outside of these, if our enemies are outside of these walls, then where are they not? Inside of the walls? Yes, exactly. And the point is, we're a team. I don't expect you all to be best friends, but we're going to be a team. And one thing we're going to learn this year is the power of being on a great team. And what I don't want to see is you making fun of each other if someone airballs a free throw. I don't want to see you talking down to your teammates. And then, of course, you reinforce good behavior around that, call out those things should they happen. And that was just something I remember when I started coaching that I really wanted to communicate to these youth basketball teams. But I had this aha moment where I realized this is also true at work, right? So the legacy I want to leave in terms of like leadership and the impact I have on folks is I think it would just be so cool if a bunch of people that I worked with, when reflecting on that time, said, "Hey, that was the best team I was ever on. That was the best team that I would have ever been a part of." Um, what drives me personally is seeing kids around town and they go, "Hey, coach, these are kids I coached in fourth grade that are now in high school." But the same thing at work. When I run into old colleagues that say, like, remember that team, remember that company, remember that time. Um, those are things people remember. And that's really what I want as a legacy for the folks that I may have impacted to say that that was the best team I was ever a part of.
Well, I love that, and I have to share that as a facilitator of teams, I often do an exercise called the best team you've ever been on.
Oh, wow.
And I will share that many people, and of course, it's any team that you've ever been on, and people often share sports teams, but it'll be across the board. But of course, the point is to share the story about the team, but then we say, well, what were the qualities of that team? And time again, what you hear is we had each other's backs. So to the extent of just saying, I have actually gathered some evidence around the country and around the world from different people who have said that precisely the thing that you were engendering within that team is what made it the best team that they were on. So seeing that that true for you and the legacy that you leave behind, my guess is that you already are.
Thank you, Ty.
Curious, of course, the path of leadership is determined by how and where we meet our growing edge, our current growing edge, right? Where are you feeling most tested right now? What challenges are stretching you the most in leadership and in life?
Yeah, this might sound surprising, but one thing that's really challenging about growing in leadership in technology and technology sales is sometimes the further you climb up the ladder, the further away you get from the real work. And the challenge I'm experiencing is that here at Recall.ai, my current company, I'm getting back to basics in a lot of ways and getting back into the weeds with things that I did 10 years ago, and realizing how much a lot of that has changed, right? For example, building our outbound pipeline generation engine, uh, you build it with different elements and in different ways than you did 10 years ago. And so it's really interesting. This is like a new chapter in my leadership journey where it's like, well, I've been in leadership so long, I've gotten far away from some of the really critical work. And so that's like the very clear and present situation for me is that now at Recall, we're a very small but very fast growing organization. We're very, very lean as well, which means we're all doing a lot of different things. I've had to go back and relearn things and do things I hadn't done in a decade, in order to be able to scale and lead the team in those areas. Um, if you'll humor me, this is very quick.
Please.
It reminds me of going on a tour of Sierra Nevada Brewery here in San Francisco, maybe 15 years ago. The one thing I remember from that tour is they talked about how they made every single employee, no matter what role, like entry level forklift driver all the way up to the CEO, no matter what your role, when you started at Sierra Nevada, you spent the first week on the bottling line. And they talked about how nothing works if this critical that doesn't work. And we want everyone to understand what it's like to work at sort of like the bottom rung of the ladder, and value that. And so in some ways, it reminds me of what I'm going through right now, which is, hey, in order to properly lead and scale this team, I actually have to get back to some of the basics, of learning how to do these things, relearning how to do some of these critical motions.
I want to spend a little bit more time here just because I feel like whoever listens to this could get a lot more value from you expounding on it a little bit. I've got a couple lines of curiosity, and maybe you take it wherever it makes the most sense. One is in having this opportunity / challenge, right, to sort of just get back into the nitty gritty of things. One, what are you seeing? I hear it's a challenge, but what are you seeing as the benefit of that to your leadership, right? And the other is, what about that is actually difficult to leading? Like, in other words, what ways might you need to grow in order to be effective as a leader and participating in the nitty gritty? I know that's a lot all at once.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, so one of the reasons why it's just so critical and to get back to basics in this context that I mentioned is the key difference between a leader telling people what what outcomes need to happen and trying to drive accountability to those outcomes, that's like a C plus, right? To get an A, it's really about like, how do you coach the team to do what's necessary to achieve those outcomes, right? And so one example of that is, let me know if this is too specific, but as we were growing the company last year, our company was fortunate that we had a great product market fit. We were first to market. So the first few years of scaling the organization before I joined was all through inbound interest with very little marketing, right? We should all be so lucky. As we tried to scale the organization, we're having to build pipeline in different ways. And we started running some outbound campaigns. I started by really trying to drive the team toward an outcome, right? We need to hit this metric. I'm going to focus the team. This is my secret. I'm going to focus them on like one key metric, and we're going to do this like building blocks, and we're going to be really accountable to this, and we're going to check on this 3 times a week. And we saw some early results, mixed results. Tons of credit to my founder and boss, Amanda, my current manager. Our founders here at Recall are very big on first principles thinking, so they don't want to do something just because people have done it that way. So Amanda really urged me to, and I ended up spending 2 weeks carefully curating every single company that we were going to go after with this campaign and every single contact to that company, roughly 3 to 5 contacts per company, personally, meticulously, slowly. And that really helped me understand, like, not just driving accountability to the outcome, but the quality in, like, the targets that we chose, how important that was, having a hand in that, calibrating on like what our real ICP was, calibrating on which personas we were going to go after. Then as I'm driving that accountability for results, for pipeline and for meetings, I'm actually seeing the connection of like which of these accounts are raising their hands first. Is our message resonating? And without going through that painstaking process that took almost 2 weeks, like carefully selecting every one, I would only have partial insights, right? Now, the challenge, which I think is the second part of your question, and what's required to grow is, honestly, it's fighting a lot of preconceived notions, right? The first thing I thought of when I was doing that, I'll admit it, was this is a waste of my time. Like, I'm spending hours and hours and hours curating this list when at other companies I might just delegate that to some group and tell them the deadline was a Friday and then move on to something more strategic, right? So I think the challenge is fighting those preconceived notions. Like, this is not that like this is beneath me, but is this a good use of my time? But it's proved to be invaluable because I now have a much better understanding of like exactly who we're targeting. I can spot errors as my team is taking on more of that on their own. Calibrated with my founder, who spent the last, essentially 5+ years building this company and knows this better than anyone. So while it feels in the moment like this is not necessarily the most high leverage valuable thing I can be doing, if you fight those kind of voices in your head and do the work, and then you see the results, it's powerful.
Well, I love that. I hear a couple of really powerful things in that. One, slowing down, and the value in that. I see it time and time again in the leaders that I work with. And also what you call preconceived notions, I call assumptions. And the willingness to look at the assumptions that we have that limit what we think is possible, and the openness and willingness to challenge those assumptions is so extremely powerful. It really lies right at the heart of the true leadership approach. So I'm so glad we took the extra time to follow through on that, because I think it's a really, really potent learning opportunity for folks, and see it across the board. Folks getting disconnected from that ground floor. So thank you for that. This last question is more of an invitation. You have the time and space here to offer to our listeners whatever it is that's most in your mind and heart to share right now. Anything at all. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Ty. And this has been a great experience. I appreciate you inviting me. This might feel a little bit out of left field, but I think one thing I'd love to share with your audience is I very much subscribe to something I've heard on the internet or seen memes or things like that. But I think the most important thing in life, hands down, is choosing the right partner. This is on my mind because I'll be celebrating 20 years of marriage in July, a big milestone. Plenty of time to get the right gift, I guess. So for me, that's my wife, Jen, and I wouldn't be where I am today without her. So I know I'm not the first person to share this wisdom, but fully subscribe to it. If I can have a couple more, I would say we've kind of talked about this today, but when people ask me what I love about being in the industry I'm in, it's just how fast you can learn and grow and develop. I think the technology industry and many others, but this is the industry that I'm in, provides a unique opportunity to just grow and learn so much in a relatively short amount of time. The way I've seen folks develop over 5 or 10 years is incredible. But what I'd like to share with your audience is none of that growth happens if you don't intentionally slow down to reflect on what you're experiencing and kind of pull out those learnings. And it's also about changing the assumptions, as you mentioned. So, and it doesn't have to be complicated. Here's what I mean, especially if you're like me and you've spent a lot of time at startups. Every little thing that happens in the business, actually little, medium, big, whatever size thing happens in business, it's all an opportunity for education. So when I talk to sales professionals especially, I ask them things like, at your last organization, did you go through a pricing change, packaging change? Did you have new leadership come on board? Did you grow the team? Did you restructure the team? Did you go after a new segment? Did you have to learn how to adapt to a new competitor hitting the market? Every single one of those inflection points is an opportunity for tremendous education. And as I started growing in my leadership career, I learned a really basic truth about leadership, which is the higher you climb, the less it's less important what you achieve in terms of results, numbers, revenue, growth percentages, and it's more important, what did you drive? What did you learn how to do? What were you a part of delivering, driving, changing? And I see this show up a lot with sales reps where it's like, tell me about yourself. And it's my quota attainment for the last 37 quarters. And it's like, but did you learn anything? Did you drive anything? Were you part of any big change, big transformation? Because I think that becomes far more important than just a numeric result on a piece of paper, right? And I think the last thing that I would share is just the power of being on a transformational team. Just like coaching basketball, no one will ever be able to convince me otherwise. Like, a great team is far greater than the sum of its parts. And so, yeah, I would encourage your listeners to find that team, right? To find that team that inspires them to grow. Because when you truly are part of one of those teams, you look back and you realize, I couldn't have grown any more or in a more meaningful way without that team. There's something really powerful about being around a group of dedicated people who have each other's back, as you mentioned, and the growth that's possible is just tremendous. I've seen it in my own career, and I would hope that all of your listeners get a chance to experience that in theirs.
Well, Justin, I so appreciate the wisdom that you've shared here today with me. I've gotten so much out of our conversation today, and I am sure that whoever listens is equally going to benefit from what you've shared here today with me. So thank you so much for being on the True Leadership Podcast.
Thank you, Ty.
That's it for this episode of the True Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, you can subscribe to YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening to this to catch future episodes. This conversation was brought to you by One Mountain Leadership, where we help leaders grow the capacity, confidence, and presence of true leadership through the True Leadership approach. To learn more about the approach, our offerings, our community, and how we can help you realize your potential in both leadership and in life, visit us at onemountainleadership.com.